Picture this: London, 1862. A winter dawn settles over the narrow streets, its pale light filtering through a rising veil of chimney smoke that tastes faintly of coal, iron, and damp brick. You move through the cold breath of the city, where gas lamps flicker atop Castian posts and the cobblestones glisten with frost. The air carries the muffled clatter of carriage wheels, the distant whistle of a steam engine, and the low murmuring of vendors preparing their morning stalls. As you walk, the buildings appear stern and dignified, four-story townhouses in soot-darkened stone, hospitals with Gothic windows, and asylums ringed with tall walls that cast long, unforgiving shadows. Beneath the quiet surface of this disciplined world lies a truth far more unsettling, that its pursuit of science often blurred into cruelty, and its desire to cure frequently led to suffering concealed behind locked doors. You step toward one such building, a Victorian medical institute, where frost coats the iron railings and the courtyard smells faintly of carbolic acid. A lantern swings in the breeze above the entrance, illuminating words etched in stone: Institute for the Advancement of Mental and Physical Health. Yet inside these walls, healing rarely meant comfort. This is where patients were strapped, purged, blistered, probed, and subjected to treatments rooted in both emerging science and enduring superstition. You stand there, the cold seeping into your gloves, realizing that the innovations celebrated in textbooks often carried hidden costs. And as we move deeper into this world, you will discover the Victorian belief that punishment, restraint, and pain were not cruelty but medicine. Before we continue, if discovering forgotten worlds fascinates you, tap like and tell me where you're listening from. This is the world you enter tonight, the laboratories, where galvanic currents sparked hope and terror, the asylums, where silence was mistaken for sanity, and the physician's chambers, where remedies emerged from equal parts ambition and fear. Here, medicine stood at a crossroads between medieval tradition and modern science. Records describe treatments that blistered flesh to release bad humors, devices that delivered electric shocks to unblock the mind, and tonics brewed with mercury, opium, arsenic, or ammonia. Historians note that physicians genuinely believed suffering was necessary for purification, and bureaucrats saw institutional control as a method to discipline both illness and society. What you will uncover is not only what doctors did, but why they believed such practices held power. You step inside the institute's entry hall, where polished stone floors reflect the faint glow of gas sconces, and the air is sharp with disinfectant. The corridor stretches long and narrow, lined with doors bearing brass plaques: therapy wing, galvanic treatment room, moral therapy ward. Nurses in stiff white aprons hurry past, their shoes tapping sharply against the stone, their expressions disciplined and unreadable. The architecture feels both magnificent and suffocating. High ceilings that echo with every footstep, archways carved with ornamental leaves, and staircases that spiral into dim upper floors. You place your gloved hand on the wooden banister, feeling the chill beneath the varnish as a faint shiver climbs your spine. In this place, beauty and dread coexist in a fragile balance, lavish yet suffocating, orderly yet unsettling. Victorian medicine was shaped by a collision of old doctrines and new discoveries. Surgeons still relied on theories dating back to Hippocrates and Galen ideas of imbalance, obstruction, and purification, yet they had begun adopting emerging sciences like neurology, electricity, and chemistry. Asylums, expanded through national reforms, became the center of moral treatment, where silence, obedience, and rigid routine were believed to restore sanity. Records from the era show that patients classified as melancholic, hysterical, or morally deviant could be subjected to restraints, immersion baths, isolation cells, or corrective therapies designed to produce shock or discomfort. Physicians insisted these interventions were rational and humane, despite the suffering they caused, illustrating how belief can overpower compassion when institutional authority goes unquestioned. And this is one of the paradoxes you confront, that an age enthralled by progress could still cling to rituals of pain, convinced that torment was a pathway to healing. Victorian doctors sought order in a world overwhelmed by industrial chaos. using the body as a battlefield upon which they fought uncertainty. Patients, silent, restrained, or unheard, became instruments of scientific ambition. In this tension between knowledge and fear, you sense the deeper truth that medicine, like all human institutions, reflects not only discovery but also doubt, desperation, and the desire to control what cannot be fully understood. You climb a narrow staircase, the steps creaking underfoot, and enter a long treatment corridor where doors with frosted glass reveal silhouettes of patients strapped to chairs or lying beneath heavy wool blankets. A nurse leads you to the hydrotherapy wing, where steam curls like ghostly fingers from beneath a wooden door. Inside, the room is lined with deep copper tubs and towering water tanks connected by thick rubber hoses. The air is heavy with humidity and the mineral scent of heated water. A patient sits submerged in a bath, arms bound gently but firmly to prevent sudden movements, while a physician monitors the temperature on a brass gauge. The silence feels fragile, as though one ripple could shatter it. Hydrotherapy, celebrated as a scientific breakthrough, relied on the belief that extreme temperatures could rebalance the nervous system. Chroniclers describe patients submerged in cold baths for hours to shock the mind into clarity. Others endured hot compresses, placed along the spine to draw inflammation outward. In some institutions, rotating water jets precursors to modern therapeutic hoses were applied to induce muscle contractions, believed to release trapped emotions or hysterical tensions. Though some physicians documented temporary calm after such treatments, modern scholars argue that much of the effect came from exhaustion, not healing. The method exemplifies how Victorian medicine blended emerging physiology with deep-rooted symbolic thinking, equating bodily discomfort with psychological purification. As you stand beside the steaming copper tub, listening to the rhythmic drip of condensed water falling from the ceiling pipes, you sense how these treatments walked a tightrope between earnest hope and institutionalized suffering. Water, the most ancient of healing symbols, became both remedy and restraint, clear, yet suffocating, cleansing yet controlling. You turn toward the next door, where a faint hum pulses through the air, vibrating like a trapped insect behind the frosted glass. It is the sound of electricity, Victorian medicine's newest fascination and its most perilous promise. And when you open that door, the world of galvanic experiments will reveal just how deeply the era believed that pain could illuminate the mind. You push open the frosted glass door, and the hum sharpens into a thin, metallic vibration that crawls along your skin. The galvanic treatment room is dim, lit by two brass-shaded lamps that cast wavering pools of amber across steel instruments arranged with almost ritualistic precision. Coils of copper wire loop between glass jars filled with chemical solutions, their surfaces trembling as tiny bubbles rise from submerged metal plates. The air smells faintly of ozone and acid, a signature of early batteries. You step closer and feel the floorboards gently tremble as an electrical coil powers up. On a leather table lies a patient, wrists loosely restrained, eyes half open as the physician prepares the electrodes. This is not a place of violence, and yet every movement, every sound, carries a quiet threat and awareness that the boundary between cure and harm here is perilously thin. Victorian physicians saw electricity as nothing less than the hidden language of life. Inspired by discoveries from scientists like Luigi Galvani and Michael Faraday, they believed that invisible currents flowed through nerves, muscles, and even the soul. Medical journals of the era describe how doctors sought to reactivate dormant pathways or stimulate the exhausted mind by applying currents to the scalp, spine, or chest. Electrodes were strapped to temples to treat melancholia, placed on the abdomen to ease hysteria, or applied to the limbs to counter paralysis. Some accounts mention patients convulsing beneath the shock, others trembling silently as though suspended between waking and collapse. While a few cases reported improvement, historians note that many treatments were based on speculation rather than consistent, evidence reflecting how innovation often raced ahead of understanding. You stand beside the physician as he adjusts a dial on the induction coil, the device humming louder as the current intensifies. He nods for you to watch closely as he presses the electrodes to the patient's forearms. The muscles tighten instantly, fingers curling as though grasping at invisible threads. A faint gasp escapes the patient's lips, more reflex than voice. In this moment, you feel the room shift, the scientific ambition, the moral certainty, and the unspoken fear that courses through every Victorian experiment. Electricity dazzled the age with its promise of modernity, yet it also exposed the limits of the era's knowledge, revealing how easily curiosity could become coercion. The body, trembling under the shock, becomes a symbol of an age trying to control forces it barely understood. Electric therapy existed at the intersection of medicine, spectacle, and belief. Reports from the period describe public demonstrations where doctors displayed the power of galvanic currents, making frogs' legs twitch or causing metal filings to dance across charged plates. Many Victorians saw electricity as both scientific marvel and mystical force and energy capable of reanimating paralysis, awakening intellect, or restoring moral discipline. Some physicians linked electrical imbalance to spiritual weakness, arguing that shocks could correct nervous deviations or moral instability. Others drew upon industrial metaphors, comparing the human body to a machine requiring rewiring. Modern scholars point out that such ideas reflected deeper anxieties of the era, the fear that industrialization was overwhelming both mind and body, and the hope that technology could restore order where traditional methods had failed. As you watch the patient's movements slow, the physician removes the electrodes and wipes the skin with a cloth soaked in vinegar to cool the inflamed patches. The patient lies still now, breathing shallowly, eyes closed, the treatment complete. The physician records the result in a leather-bound ledger, noting muscle responsiveness, tremors, and observed improvements in composure. His handwriting is precise, confident, and yet something in the room suggests uncertainty, faint tremble in the gaslight. A lingering scent of burned skin, a silence that feels heavier than before. You sense the emotional architecture of Victorian medicine, its polished surfaces concealing doubt, its confident language masking fragile hopes, its grand progress shadowed by unspoken suffering. Electricity, for all its fascination, reveals the Victorian struggle to define the boundary between science and morality. Was the treatment meant to heal, discipline, or simply observe? Historians argue that the answer shifts depending on which record you read. Some describe genuine attempts at neurological therapy, while others reveal a system preoccupied with control, especially in institutions where patients had little power to refuse. Electricity symbolized modern advancement, yet it also exposed the human cost of experimentation in an era where consent was not a central concern. You feel this ambiguity settle around you like a fine mist, the awareness that progress often arrives entangled with violence, and that the pursuit of knowledge can obscure the voices of those subjected to it. A nurse enters quietly and leads you down another hallway, where the walls grow narrower and the light dims. The hum of machinery fades behind you, replaced by a soft rustling sound, like pages being turned in a distant room. You step into the moral therapy ward, where treatment relies not on machines but on silence, routine, and behavioral discipline. The ward is orderly, almost serene, wooden chairs arranged in perfect symmetry, windows draped with thick curtains to soften the morning light, and small writing desks where patients copy religious texts or moral essays. The air is still, carrying the faint scent of lavender meant to calm the nerves. Yet beneath this quiet surface lies a system built on conformity rather than compassion. A world where deviation from expected behavior was pathologized and obedience was considered a cure. Moral therapy emerged from Enlightenment ideals that valued self-control and rational discipline. Physicians believed that mental illness arose from moral imbalance, improper habits, or emotional excess. Thus, treatment focused on reshaping the patient's environment, strict routines, constant supervision, regulated activities, and the removal of stimulating influences. Records describe how patients were discouraged from expressing anger, grief, or excitement, as such emotions were thought to destabilize the mind. Work assignments, religious study, and silent meals were common, intended to instill order and repair the fractured will. While some institutions offered genuinely humane care, others used moral therapy as a tool of conformity, suppressing individuality under the guise of stability. The result was a discipline that felt peaceful yet suffocating, gentle yet deeply controlling. Standing in the ward, you realize how powerfully architecture shapes belief. The room's symmetry imposes calm, its muted colors quiet the senses, and its orderly design reinforces the idea that peace comes from obedience. Historians note that many Victorian institutions were built according to the panopticon principle, where visibility ensured discipline. Even without chains, patients lived within invisible boundaries drawn by constant oversight and unspoken expectations. You sense how silence, often praised as therapeutic, also became a form of erasing emotions rather than understanding them, smoothing over suffering rather than addressing its roots. Here, the ideal of moral improvement intertwined with social control, revealing a world where healing and hierarchy were intimately connected. But the next room will shatter this controlled tranquility. Down the hall, behind a reinforced wooden door, lies a treatment that Victorians believed could purge the body of madness, sin, or hysteria. A method older than machines, older than moral philosophy, preserved with scientific pride. A treatment built on fire, irritation, and deliberate injury. When that door opens, you step into the world of blisters, burns, and controlled wounds. The realm of Victorian. You push open the reinforced door, and a wave of sharp, resinous heat washes over you. The counter-irritation chamber is smaller than the previous rooms, its walls lined with shelves of glass jars filled with dark ointments, red-tinted salves, and powders that smell of mustard, camphor, and turpentine. Metal trays hold heated spatulas, scarifiers, and tiny brass cups used for cupping. A brazier glows in the corner, casting restless orange light across the tiled floor. You step inside, feeling the temperature rise, the air growing thick and medicinal. A patient sits on a wooden stool, cloth pulled back from their shoulder as a physician smears a pungent paste across the skin. Within seconds, the flesh reddens, then swells, then begins to blister slowly, deliberately, painfully. Here, injury is not an accident, it is the treatment. Victorian counter-irritation rested upon an ancient medical logic that creating a controlled injury could draw illness away from deeper organs. Physicians in the 19th century applied mustard plasters, heated metal plates, or blistering agents made from cantharides, the powdered wings of blister beetles, to provoke inflammation. Medical journals described how fresh irritation redirects harmful humors, echoing beliefs dating back centuries. Some doctors applied caustic chemicals to treat chronic pain or mental disturbances, believing that intense surface agony could disrupt or relieve internal distress. Others used cupping or leeches in combination with blistering salves, layering therapies to intensify the effect. Modern historians argue that while some relief may have occurred due to temporary nerve distraction, the practice largely reflected pre-modern theories persisting well into the Victorian era, long after their foundations had begun to crumble. You watch as the physician checks the patient's rising blister, its translucent dome swelling with fluid, the skin beneath bright and inflamed. He nods approvingly, then places a warmed brass cup over the area, creating suction that deepens the irritation. The patient winces, gripping the edge of the stool. Their breath shakes, controlled but tight. You sense the physician's certainty. To him, this suffering is a controlled exchange, a necessary discomfort in pursuit of rebalancing the body. And yet, standing there, you feel the deeper tension, the way Victorian medicine often transformed the body into a canvas for theories inherited rather than proven. The blister glistens under the gaslight, a symbol of a world clinging to older ideas even as it embraced the language of modern science. Counter-irritation was frequently prescribed for nervous disorders, a broad Victorian category encompassing anxiety, hysteria, melancholy, and even persistent grief. Physicians documented cases where blistering salves were applied along the spine to lubricate the nerves, or stimulate circulation to dormant areas. In women, mustard plasters were sometimes placed across the abdomen or lower back to treat hysteria, diagnosis shaped more by gender expectations than biology. Some historians argue that such treatments reinforced social ideals by punishing emotional expression, while others note that physicians genuinely believed irritation could break cycles of distress. In essence, the skin became a battlefield, bearing the marks of a society struggling to define the boundaries between emotional suffering and physical disease. Standing in the heated room, you notice how silence amplifies the ritual. The hiss of the brazier, the faint crackle of burning resin. The physician's careful movements, each detail, reflects a world where authority shaped meaning. The patient's pain is interpreted through doctrine, their body an object upon which theory is tested. Victorian medicine valued discipline, and counter-irritation mirrored that value. Pain as purification, inflammation as renewal, injury as intervention. You sense how easily belief can transform harm into remedy, especially when the surrounding world reinforces the idea that discomfort is virtuous, that suffering reveals truth, that healing demands sacrifice. The physician wipes his hands and leads you toward a narrow side room where rows of glass jars sit beneath dim lamps. Each jar contains a different irritant: mustard seed, capsicum powder, ammonia solutions, and pale green cantharides paste. Their labels are written in a precise hand, the script almost elegant, yet the contents tell another story, one of practices that blur the line between medicine and endurance. Some institutions recorded entire walls of blistered patients, their skin marked by circular burns or long inflamed streaks. Chroniclers of the era described the smell of such wards, a mixture of ointments, sweat, and peeling skin. You imagine the atmosphere, sterile yet oppressive, orderly yet charged with the quiet tension of pain treated not as suffering but as procedure. Victorian treatments reflected more than medical theories. They reflected the philosophical climate of the age. The 19th century was obsessed with regulation, regulating factories, cities, prisons, and mines. Medicine echoed this impulse by treating the body as an unruly system requiring control. Counter-irritation, with its deliberate injury, symbolized the belief that suffering could realign the patient's moral or emotional imbalance. Some historians compare this practice to broader Victorian social structures, where discomfort was framed as noble, restraint as virtuous, and endurance as character. In this light, medical treatments become windows into the deeper psychology of the era, a culture both fascinated and frightened by the expanding boundaries of scientific knowledge. As you leave the blistering chamber, the air cools and the sharp scent of mustard fades behind you. A nurse guides you down a stone corridor illuminated by high, narrow windows that let in slivers of pale daylight. The quiet returns, but it is a different quiet one, tinged with the echoes of controlled pain, of bodies marked by doctrine. Ahead lies another wing of the institute, one dominated not by fire or electricity, but by the power of the unseen. Vapors, gases, and chemical concoctions believed to calm the mind, purge the body, or control unruly behavior. These were the tools that seeped into lungs, blurred vision, and clouded consciousness. You step toward a heavy wooden door marked inhalation ward, where faint tendrils of scented vapor drift through the cracks. This next chamber holds a different kind of torment, less violent outwardly, yet profoundly invasive. Here, breath itself became the medium of treatment, and the line between remedy and suffocation narrowed dangerously. When you cross that threshold, you enter the world of Victorian chemical therapies, intoxicating, disorienting, and often perilous. You ease open the heavy wooden door, and at once a wave of warm, fragrant vapor curls toward you, softening the air like a veil drawn across your senses. The inhalation ward is dimly lit, its long rows of padded chairs arranged facing a central brass apparatus that releases slow clouds of medicated mist. The room hums gently with the sound of valves opening and closing, each exhale of the machine releasing a new plume of scented vapor: lavender, laudanum, chloroform, camphor, and ether mingling into a dense medicinal fog. You step inside, feeling the air grow thick in your lungs, warm on your skin. Patients sit motionless, heads tilted back, eyes half shut, as the physician adjusts the flow of chemicals through the tubing. Here the treatment slips quietly beneath consciousness, leaving no scars on the skin, yet working with a power more invasive than heat or electricity. It enters with every breath. Victorian physicians believed that vapors could calm agitation, suppress violent outbursts, or soothe hysteria. Medical journals from the era describe inhalation therapy as a means of gently arresting the turmoil of the mind, a phrase that sounds compassionate until one examines its application inside asylums. Ether and chloroform, originally used in surgery, were sometimes administered to patients experiencing mania or extreme panic, not to treat the underlying condition, but to enforce stillness. Laudanum vapors provided temporary escape, numbing emotional pain while fostering dependency. Camphor and turpentine mixtures were thought to invigorate nervous sluggishness, despite offering little real benefit. Some historians argue that inhalation rooms became controlled environments where compliance could be manufactured chemically, where distress was not addressed but muted. You move deeper into the ward, and a nurse offers you a cloth infused with diluted lavender and opium essence. You lift it cautiously, inhaling a faint trace of sweetness mixed with bitterness. Across the room, a patient sits rigid, hands folded, breathing through a cone attached to the main machine. Their shoulders rise and fall slowly, rhythmically, as the vapor clouds around them. The physician observes with detached calm, recording notes in a small ledger. Reduced agitation, improved quietness, composure maintained. The language is careful, measured, suggesting control rather than insight. And standing there, you sense the underlying truth that Victorian inhalation therapy blurred the boundary between sedation and suppression, presenting chemical restraint as treatment. Chemical therapy grew from the Victorian fascination with altering consciousness. This was the era that refined ether, commercialized morphine, and turned opium into a household remedy. Middle-class homes stocked laudanum tinctures. Surgeons used chloroform with growing confidence. Pharmacists experimented with new formulations. The same substances that soothed surgeons' patients found their way into asylum wards, where the purpose shifted from healing to management. Chroniclers of the time noted that some institutions relied heavily on inhalants, using them to maintain order during crowded years when resources were thin. Modern scholars suggest that the rise of chemical treatments reflected not only scientific enthusiasm, but also social anxieties surrounding behavior, deviance, and the visibility of mental illness. You watch the patient's breathing deepen, eyelids fluttering as the vapor pulls them into a heavy stillness. The physician lowers the valve, allowing the cloud to thin. When the patient finally exhales, it is a long, slow release, their body slumping gently in the chair. A nurse steps forward to support them, guiding them to a resting cot along the wall. You notice the faint sheen of sweat on their brow, the slight tremor in their hands, subtle markers of the body's negotiation with the chemicals inside it. The room's quiet hum continues, steady and unbroken, like a machine breathing on behalf of those who cannot speak or resist. Inhalation therapy reveals a deeper pattern in Victorian medicine, the desire to command the invisible. Vapors, scents, and chemical mists offered a way to influence thoughts, emotions, and behaviors without physical force. The treatment felt gentle compared to blistering salves or electric shocks, yet its effects were profound. It dissolved agitation, dulled senses, and quieted rebellion, not through reason or dialogue, but through chemical surrender. You sense how this method aligned with the Victorian belief in hierarchy and discipline, reflecting a world that sought harmony by dulling its most unsettling voices. As you walk toward the back of the ward, the air thins and grows cooler. Here, smaller inhalation devices sit within glass cases, portable vaporizers, ceramic scent diffusers, and brass inhalers modeled after smoking pipes. Many were marketed to the upper classes as tools for nervous refinement, offering a socially acceptable means of managing stress. Opium-based inhalants were common among both patients and healthy individuals, blurring the line between medicine and habit. Scholars point out that these practices reveal not just the medical culture of the period, but its emotional architecture, its discomfort with vulnerability, its dependence on sedation, its fear of the ungovernable mind. You step out of the vapor-filled chamber, lungs tinged with a faint medicinal sweetness, and enter a long corridor lit by narrow windows. The light is stark here, washing everything in pale grey. The scent of chemicals lingers, drifting in threads that cling to your clothes. Ahead lies a staircase leading to a part of the institute rarely shown to outsiders, an area where Victorian treatment methods grew harsher, colder, and more mechanical. You trace the curve of the banister as you ascend, feeling the temperature drop with each step. The air grows quieter, heavier, the silence resounding like a held breath. At the top of the stairs is a thick metal door with a small viewing slit. A guard unlocks it, the hinge groaning as it swings open. Beyond it lies a chamber built not for sensation, but for its absence of treatment, designed to remove stimulus, emotion, and movement alike. When you cross that threshold, you enter the world of cold water therapies and enforced stillness, the Victorian hydrotherapy ward. The storm that has been building throughout this journey finally breaks as you step into the twilight of the Victorian Arja, world where science sharpens its tools, belief systems collapse under evidence, and the fight between morality and progress becomes almost unbearable. You stand in a London hospital in 1899, the corridors washed in the cold light of gas lamps that hiss like living creatures. The air smells of chrysotile bandages, fresh ink, disinfectant, and a fading trace of burning coal drifting in from the street. Here, in this moment, you can feel the century turning beneath your feet. You watch surgeons once butchers move with new purpose, instruments glinting silver, sterilizers steaming, hands gloved in rubber for the first time. Yet even now, in this cleaner, brighter world, you sense the same Victorian dread lingering like a shadow waiting behind every curtain. You follow a physician into the ward, and the transformation of medicine unfolds before you like a living chronicle. Electric lighting flickers overhead, weak, unreliable, and humming, yet revolutionary. Patients lie in iron hospital beds instead of wooden frames. Nurses in crisp aprons record temperatures with newly standardized thermometers, noting pulse rates, observing respiration, tracking symptoms with precision unimaginable 50 years earlier. You see how germ theory, once dismissed as French fantasy, now rules every diagnosis. Koch's postulates guide every whisper between doctors. Carbolic acid, once mocked for its sharp odor, is embraced as salvation. And yet, even here, a quiet conflict brews. The old guard insists disease still arises from constitution and character, while the new generation demands cultures, microscopes, and evidence. You, caught between the centuries, feel the tug of war between faith and proof shake the floor beneath your boots. Moving deeper into the hospital, you witness a scene that encapsulates the era's contradictions. A child with diphtheria lies gasping behind a thin curtain, the rattle unmistakable. But instead of prayer alone, the doctors bring out the newest weapon, antitoxin serum. It is precious, unstable, and extracted from the blood of immunized horses, innovation that feels miraculous and monstrous in equal measure. You watch as the physician injects the cloudy fluid, hands steady but eyes anxious. Around you, nurses hold their breath, waiting to see whether the child's chest will lift more easily. In that fragile moment, you realize how Victorian medicine is still a gamble, even with new tools. There is no guarantee. There is only hope and fear eternally twined. You step into the surgical theater, where tiered benches rise like an ancient arena. But now the performers are not showmen. They are scientists. Ether lamps burn steadily. Instruments rest in boiling basins. Cotton masks still rudimentary cover faces. A man on the operating table lies motionless under chloroform. The once deadly drip now carefully calibrated with rubber tubing and drip chambers. The operation, an abdominal mass, likely cancer. Once untouchable, now barely within reach. You watch as the surgeon cuts cleanly, precisely, the blood less than you expect, thanks to ligatures and improved clamps. And still, as the minutes stretch into an hour, an eerie tension hangs in the room. Nobody knows if the patient will survive infection afterward. Antisepsis is growing. Asepsis is emerging. But bacteria are invisible enemies, and even the new generation cannot defeat what they cannot fully see. Outside the hospital walls, The Victorian world is undergoing its own transformation. Medical textbooks shift from moralizing language, weak character, personal failing, to cold anatomical precision. Public health acts reshape cities. Sewage systems reduce cholera. Quarantine stations guard ports. Midwives and physicians clash as childbirth moves from home hearths to sterilized wards. The workhouse infirmaries, once pits of suffering, slowly evolve into organized care centers. You walk through London's foggy streets and see posters urging vaccination, pamphlets condemning it, activists shouting that science has overreached. The era's greatest irony becomes clear. The more medicine advances, the more society fears it. Every breakthrough is greeted with suspicion. Every cure feels like a betrayal of tradition. Night falls, and you find yourself standing in a cramped Victorian attic, lit only by a small oil lamp. A physician sits across a rough wooden table, writing feverishly in a leather-bound journal. You look over his shoulder and read the words forming beneath his ink-stained hand. We are on the edge of a new world, so close we can almost grasp it, but terrified of what it may require us to abandon. Around him lie instruments of transition, an early stethoscope, darkened with years of use, a microscope with brass fittings that gleam in the dim light, a dusty Bible still open to passages once read at the bedside of every dying patient. His hands hesitate as he writes, as if he senses the spiritual cost of the century ending. You follow him to the window, overlooking London below. Carriages rattle through wet streets, blending with the soft glow of newly installed electric lamps. Factories thrum with restless energy. Universities publish discoveries monthly. Medical schools debate ethics for the first time. Yet beneath this progress, the physician admits a cruel truth. Many patients still die. Tuberculosis fills cemeteries. Childbirth continues to claim mothers. Cancers grow unchecked. Mental illness remains misunderstood, often punished instead of treated. Hospitals are cleaner but still overwhelmed. Doctors are wiser but still powerless against entire classes of disease. And you realize, Victorian medicine, for all its triumphs, is still only a stepping stone, an era suspended between darkness and dawn. As the century draws its final breath, you walk once more through the hospital corridors. The air is quieter now, lamps dim, patients sleep. You pause at the bedside of a young woman recovering from surgery, a procedure that would have killed her only decades earlier. Her breathing is steady, her complexion warm, her pulse strong. For the first time in hours, you sense the possibility of survival, of renewal, of a future guided not by superstition but by knowledge and courage. This single life feels like a symbol of everything the Victorian era fought for: progress, understanding, and the possibility of healing. And just when you think the journey has ended, a voice calls from behind you, a senior physician holding a telegram in his hand, his expression unreadable. He walks toward you, the paper trembling slightly as gaslight flickers across his glasses. You brace yourself, knowing that in this era, a single message can alter everything. He hands it to you, and the ink is still wet. The words are brief, urgent, and as your eyes move across the lines, you feel the floor tilt again beneath you, as if history itself has shifted. The telegram announces the discovery of something so small it cannot be seen with the naked eye, something that will redefine disease forever. A new century begins in your hands.